we have written a few months back actually to the government around this topic, saying we think you should improve this regime to make it easier to do this research. It's really important. So there might well be some steps in that. Again, with many things, the government may well need to do some legislative change, not just announce a new policy, as is often the way with drug law. It's not, you can't just announce something and it's done. There's often a need to at least do some secondary legislation, if not primary. So yeah, we'll have to see where that goes in the next few months.
A UK state of mind. Britain's currently undergoing a great deal of change, especially when it comes to medical cannabis. While there's a long way to go before the social stigma dissipates, many clinics, pharmacies, patients and producers are coming together to push the industry forward. Mike Morgan-Giles, Chief Executive of the Cannabis Industry Council, tells us more. Hello, welcome to the Lobsterpot podcast. I'm Dave Barson, and yeah, we're in the UK today, as always. But our guest is here in the UK as well, Jamie. It's like that's a rarity for us, actually, isn't it?
It does feel like that, doesn't it? We seem to go, we import our guests.
We import our guests.
We're not
like that.
We don't do so much of the domestic market.
But you're very on brand when we talk about import, because that's the whole medical cannabis setup here in the UK. But someone who will know more about that is our guest today. It's Mike Morgan-Giles from the CIC, the Cannabis Industry Council, and he's the chief exec. Welcome to the show, Mike. How you doing?
Yeah, nice to see you both. Yeah, well, thanks, and thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, not at all. So, I mean, it's always interesting here in the UK. We speak to lots of people from different countries around the world. It's like, what's happening here? But on our own sort of turf, it's an interesting setup, because again, we're 5 years into medical cannabis, and how do you kind of see the state of play? What's you got your sort of finger on the pulse a little bit more over here. How are things shaking out? Obviously, we're still looking at increasing patient numbers here, raising awareness, and again working. But tell us more. Tell us from your perspective how you feel like it's all kind of shaking out.
Yeah, so I mean, I think patient numbers, at least according to my colleague Mike Barnes, are about 32,000 plus. I think he was saying that they're increasing by about 1,000 a month, and that estimate came back in November. So it could be up to about 35, albeit it's difficult to get precise numbers because you're relying on every clinic saying where they're at, and it's obviously not always straightforward to get all those numbers. So clearly we need to grow that market a lot more to make the industry more viable. You can look at other countries to get a sense of where the UK could and should be. Australia and Germany are two obvious examples, where numbers are, I think 10 times higher or more prescription patients, and there's no reason why the UK couldn't get to that place. There's about 1.8 million people who apparently are on getting cannabis off the illicit market for medical purposes. There's obviously others who may be cannabis naive, who it might be a really, really suitable, great medicine for them. So we're talking about big numbers here. It's a question of raising awareness. It's a question of accessibility, of cost, and there's a lot of work that needs doing with regulations as well. So there's work that we can do, but we can get there, in time. But it's not an easy situation at the moment, and we can come on to politics as well, if you like.
Yeah, no, please. I mean, again, I know from the Cannabis Industry Council. I mean, for those that don't know what you guys are doing, do you want to give us a bit of an overview, and again, how that plays into what you're doing with the kind of policy aspect as well?
Yeah, so we were founded about 3 years ago, and Thermador are one of our members, so obviously very happy to be on the show in support of our members too. And we have about 115 across the supply chain in memberships. That's largely producers, clinics, pharmacies, but we also have consultants, we also have campaigning organisations, we have others like law firms in membership too. So it's quite a broad range. The idea behind the CIC is we try and bring the industry together. We have working groups that meet every month on a whole range of topics, whether it's prescription cannabis or standards or CBD or research. We do events and networking for the industry. So we had a big event towards the end of last year in Medical Cannabis Awareness Week, where we had workshops and speakers, and we did a networking event. We do those roughly every quarter. We obviously represent the industry with government, so policy is very much developed on a bottom-up basis. So in the working groups, members will come forward with ideas. They'll discuss things they think are important, and then we'll try and represent those ideas to regulators, to policymakers. So one example of that is our campaign on GPs prescribing. So at the moment, for those who don't know, in the UK, only a specialist doctor can prescribe cannabis to their patients. So we'd like to see that open up to GPs, because we think that would help destigmatize the industry. It would normalize those interactions between patients and the people they see most, the doctor they see most, basically. And invariably that will have an increase in supply of doctors as well, which will help bring down cost, and it will just generally make it a more viable medicine for patients. So we think that's really important, and that's one thing we've been pushing on. And then there are other things as well. So it's around how can we improve accessibility on the NHS, which I know is what those advocating for children's rights are very much supportive of. It's what many adult patients tell us as well about the cost. And in terms of cost as well, we're also thinking, well, how can we try and increase the number of private prescriptions, which will then get funded by the state as well. So it's not one model or the other. It's trying to see how we can just make medicine more affordable, and then also trying to get change in areas like electronic prescribing, where at the moment doctors have to take the script and put it in the post, and that just adds time, and it's frankly less secure, and it makes no sense for many reasons. So that will just streamline a basic process that will make it a lot easier for clinics and for doctors. And then we can obviously come on to things like the hemp and CBD regulations, which again, we're trying to push for sensible change that will help members in the industry be able to get products to market in an accessible, affordable way, and help hemp, for example, start to become more prevalent in the construction industry, where it can be a great building material. So there's lots of different things that we're doing and trying to push for in support of members. And we obviously also offer a range of other promotional benefits and other opportunities to them as well for being a member.
Oh, absolutely. But I mean, in terms of, again, from a political perspective, thinking around, okay, so UK, we've got a general election coming up. It doesn't feel like there's going to be a kind of broader legalization from a recreational perspective anytime soon. And that's not necessarily the end game for a lot of people. But I suppose in terms of that broader awareness, that kind of perspective to kind of get people familiar with it, the kind of stigma reducing. What from your perspective have you seen when sort of dealing with Westminster? What's their sort of take on it? Because it doesn't feel like it's an important issue. Yeah, I may be wrong, but it's interesting to sort of see what they're sort of saying. I know that obviously there are advocates and there's kind of those who are completely against it, but what are you sort of seeing?
Well, I suppose just to try and cover off the two larger parties first of all. So I mean, obviously it was under the Conservatives who actually legalised medical cannabis. So fair play for making that change, albeit under fairly significant duress from a whole range of parents and campaigners and people you'll be familiar with. But where we are now, it's got to a bit of a difficult situation where there's an election coming up, where clearly, starting with the Conservatives, they're behind in the polls. They're struggling to have a unified party. There's a battle for ideas going on within their party, which there's not that much consensus on quite a few different things, and it's not clear to me that they intend, at least currently or probably in the next few months, to do anything on drug law reform. And whether or not anything gets included in their manifesto, I think, is very debatable. I suspect it won't be. You'd obviously hope for things like back to the hemp point. Could one of the parties include the importance of hemp to the climate change debate and how we start to decarbonize construction? I mean, I think there's and some of these sensible changes on the medical side. These are reasonable things to talk about, but whether they'll include them, I think, is an open question. And then you come on to Labour, who obviously haven't been in power for 14 years now, and if you read the press about how they're approaching other topics, it's very much sort of clearing the barnacles off the boat, trying not to be controversial in any way possible. They've ditched various other policies that they committed to before. I'm not going to get into the rights and wrongs of that. That's a matter for them. But it's clear that they intend to run a pretty risk-free campaign over the next 12 months, and it's difficult again to envisage them doing anything that they think will affect their electoral chances, rightly or wrongly.
Yeah, wasn't it? I think it was under Gordon Brown's government where it was kind of went from a class C to a class B drug, wasn't it? So again, that sort of tells you, I don't know. Again, that was a while ago, but again, you feel like, I mean, you talked about, you know, there are sensible things. There are things that are very obvious. So like, if you do this, this will be beneficial. Like, you know, you talked about, you know, hemp and carbon reduction and things like that. We talk about sort of from the medical side. I mean, do you think, I mean, again, in the US, you're seeing this kind of discussion around, you know, descheduling or kind of moving it down a grade. And that obviously has an impact on, you know, the kind of research that can be done. Is there a similar thing in the UK? I mean, if it went from a B to a C or was completely decriminalized, I mean, what would that as a kind of starting point for people to be able to, again, it's not even about access. It's more about, you know, there is this, you know, if it's kind of descheduled or, you know, rescheduled or whatever you want to call it, there is, you know, a precedent set for being able to do more with the plant, being able to investigate further, to do research and to give people more access ultimately. But it's almost like there's these moving parts that kind of need to work in order for it to come to a kind of more definitive conclusion.
Yeah, so the government actually has been doing a piece of work called Barriers to Research, and I think they've been seeking the advice of the Advisory Council on Misuse of Drugs for that, and it's been broader than just cannabis. I mean, I won't get into all the other drugs we're talking about, but they've been looking at how do we improve the viability of the research industry for these new up-and-coming medicines. Well, not new in the sense of cannabis, but new in the sense of legality of where we are. And they are open to making changes. And indeed, the drugs minister did, in principle, accept, I think, some of the recommendations made by the ACMD recently on how can we, you know, increase investment into research. How can we just make it viable for research institutions and university to do more research? And part of that was the scheduling, looking at what they can change. I mean, I think with cannabis, it's quite complicated. I think it's scheduled in 3 different places. I think cannabis itself, I think, is Schedule 1, but then when you get into medical cannabis, it's Schedule 2, and then I believe Epidiolex is another schedule lower down. So there is already a variety of scheduling, and clearly the lower down it goes, the easier it is to do that research. So, you know, we have written a few months back actually to the government around this topic, saying, you know, we think you should improve this regime to make it easier to do this research. It's really important. So there might well be some steps in that. Again, with many things, the government may well need to do some legislative change, not just announce a new policy, as is often the way with drug law. It's not, you can't just announce something that's done. There's often a need to at least do some secondary legislation, if not primary. So yeah, we'll have to see where that goes in the next few months.
No, sorry, Jamie.
No, I was just going to say, I think the political angle is always a fascinating one to me. And I think when we're talking about the nature of cannabis as a product, be it, you know, as a medical product for patients or as a recreational product for consumers, it's always interesting to me. Everyone within cannabis is deeply passionate about the plant and the product in whatever form they are particularly interested in it in. But something that strikes me is that it almost seems a bit abstract as a political play. You know, there doesn't feel like there's a great deal of will for it in the country more broadly. I don't know what your experiences are telling, you know, friends and family what you do for a living. You know, fair enough, you're not plant touching, but you're very much in the thick of it in terms of the industry. It'd be interesting to hear what people's reaction to, you know, the work that you're doing with the CIC is kind of more broadly, you know, outside of the circles that, you know, we all sort of normally mix in.
Yeah, I mean, people have been quite open-minded when I've explained about the role I'm doing. I mean, I think, you know, the CIC isn't advocating for reform in terms of adult use, which, you know, may be one thing which, you know, helps some people buy into the agenda more, because we all know that, you know, there are politicians and the media who may well be quite favourable towards you know, expanding medical use, but when you get into you know, other types, it becomes a more challenging conversation. So I mean, I think that's obviously something that's important to the CIC. It's pushing forward with change on the medical side, and I think that's probably you know, makes some of those conversations more straightforward. But yeah, been pretty open-minded. People have been speaking to them, to be honest.
I think it's an interesting thing. It's something that people don't really have a problem with generally. People that I've spoken to, there aren't many people that have a problem with it. But I don't feel like it's something that they're necessarily that interested in. And I think that's also the issue politically. It is, you're right about de-risking, for Labour at least, and probably the same for the Conservatives, really. But it's also like there doesn't feel like there's a huge push behind it. So it makes the work that you guys are doing, even more important, because the campaigns you're doing and speaking to politicians, you kind of touched on it before. How can we recruit more patients, in the medical market? Do you think that the kind of linchpin of that is GPs? Do you think that's, or is it kind of a multifaceted thing? It's all going to come together, and we're going to see it kind of, really bloom in the next few years? Or do you think it is one thing, and once it's unlocked, that'll be, sorted?
I mean, I think it'll take more than just GPs prescribing. But I think that's a pretty sort of key part of the jigsaw, because when we did a report on GPs prescribing, which we sort of launched in Parliament last year, and part of that report looked at Australia, Germany, and Denmark, doing comparisons. And as I said earlier, like the numbers there are so much higher, and in terms of some of the demographics, in terms of the rules, otherwise they're not that dissimilar in many ways. So that is clearly a key blocker into sort of opening up the conversation and the legal market, legal medical market more. But there are other things, of course, as well. I mean, the cost remains a challenge. From as I understand it, the cost of various prescription cannabis products now is not that dissimilar to the black market. However, I mean, does not mean that's cheap when you're comparing it to other prescription medications, which
100%. Yeah, I mean, I know firsthand as a patient, it's we're talking about 90 quid for sort of 10 grams. We're talking about a bottle like that. It's a lot, but like you say, it's not dissimilar price wise from what the illicit market would be. But then you're assured of the provenance, you're assured that it's been tested. There are certain assurances that go with it. But at the same time, it's the obstacles to actually get to that point. It's it's not just proving to, doctors that you've tried 2 different things for whatever condition you have. It's also I actually have to link my medical records to this cannabis clinic. And I think for a lot of people, even those who, show willing, even myself, it's like, you feel like there's always going to be a knock-on effect or something, and you're never quite sure what that impact's going to be. And I feel it's similar with kind of like, raising awareness, or, again, we talked about the whole, this needs to happen in order for the next bit to happen. We need GPs to have, access, be able to prescribe, freely in order to kind of get over that stigma. And it always feels like, these moving parts, whichever way you look at it. And I think it feels like, how do we get that momentum to kind of drive patient numbers, and, what needs to be done? It's, and again, there's no straightforward answer. I know that. It's just continually sort of banging the drum. But, I think it'd be interesting to know, speaking to clinics and things like that, is there a kind of concerted effort, kind of almost like more broadly to the public that, could help raise more awareness? And do you know what I mean? It kind of feels like there needs to be the sort of front end of the, it's available. If you've got, these sort of conditions, you can access medical cannabis. Behind the scenes, all of the other stuff is still happening. It's got to be that, as you were saying, Jamie, this kind of multifaceted approach. I guess roundabout way of saying, what's your sort of take on how those 2 elements almost kind of work hand in hand?
Yeah, I mean, I think increasing public awareness is another part of this jigsaw. Not straightforward, because you can't obviously advertise medicines, especially unlicensed medicines, but no medicine really. So if you're one of those in the supply chain, it'd be very difficult really to do that kind of work. Albeit some things are possible. If you look in the press, sometimes you'll see there are. They talk about patients and their stories. So there are things out there that some of the public could be aware of. But certainly, yeah, there are, at least anecdotally, some of the people I've spoken to were not aware cannabis was legal as a medicine. And
it feels like this is a well-kept secret, or a badly kept secret. But yeah, like you say, it's what we like 30 under 40,000 patients in the UK. We're a nation of 67 million. I think Australia's half the population. I was reading a story the other day, and they've got is it over 100,000 patients or something? And so it's like you say, there are different reasons why that's the case and why we can't almost, hey, check this out, everyone. But it's always interesting. I always feel like with the media, whenever you see an article or something, and I'm going on about this. It's one of my personal bugbears. There's still a kind of misrepresentation in terms of, like, you know, someone who's in a TV show, for example, whose life is downward spiraling. It's like, and they turn to cannabis, and you know what I mean. It's always shown in this very negative light, and it's almost like when you kind of put it out there outside of the, you know, the echo chamber and the halls of power, regular people are just going like, well, you know, it's something people can get into, but it's like booze, really. They'll just, you know, you can enjoy it, but at the same time, do you know what I mean? It still feels very, you know, it's frustrating. And, you know, for me, it's kind of like, you want to be able to tell those more positive stories, or kind of help plant those sort of seeds in terms of, like, actually, there are certain ways we recommend the media should be talking about cannabis as a plant, as medication, as all of these sorts of things. And you never kind of see that happening. And I don't know, maybe that's something for me to think on, actually. But
well, no, I mean, I think that the media are a key part of this discussion, and you know, you obviously work with them from time to time, as do we, and yeah, it can be a challenge to try and make sure you get your exact message out there. They will obviously have their own ideas and their own preconceptions, and they might want to put their own spin on things depending on their views, their sort of broad agenda, and that's how the media has always been. And obviously they're important in informing public debate. But I mean, as is social media as well. I mean, we shouldn't forget that, and that's obviously again a challenge in terms of advertising. A lot of these big platforms will shadow ban people and will block people for using certain words or certain pictures, and you know, the obvious type of thing. And yeah, that's again problematic if you're trying to reach an audience to try and even just educate. We're not talking about promotion now, and that's something that, you know, we can do as an organization. It's something even Thermador could do, not being in the supply chain. It's to educate people, and yeah, that's not made very straightforward, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. It's yeah, I think that's an ongoing thing, and I think, again, well, we should talk about that some more offline, absolutely. But yeah, in terms of CIC, in terms of what you guys are doing for the rest of 2024, what's kind of happening? What are some of the key things you guys are going to be doing this year?
Yeah, we've got a research paper that will hopefully be published in the coming months. So last year we did quite an extensive project with a few partners, and we had an independent academic institution, part of York University, do a study for us saying what would happen if cannabis was prescribed in the NHS for chronic pain, because at the moment it obviously isn't. It's only for some very specific conditions. And they did a health economics analysis, and we're not going to get into it because it hasn't been published yet. But what I will say is that, you know, the outcome was something we weren't disappointed with. We were content with, you know, some of the findings, and hopefully that will be published, you know, in the coming months. And that's an important piece of work, because we can use that to start talking to people like NICE and the other regulators who are involved with making decisions around what is available on the NHS, and say, well, actually, you know, one of your concerns, one of your views may have been this, but we've now have got evidence to suggest that isn't an issue, actually. And so then it becomes a discussion purely around efficacy and safety. And, you know, there are ways to have those conversations, which is around a real world evidence and around clinical trials. But if we can knock this economic cost discussion on, you know, out the way, that will certainly help move things forward. So that's one thing that is in the pipeline. We obviously want to keep going with our GPs campaign. You know, albeit I've raised the challenges of the next few months politically, but we certainly want to try and keep pushing that and see where that leads, because that's really important for the industry. And we've got, you know, other things on the agenda as well. I obviously talked about hemp earlier. We want to try and push that forward. We're pushing for e-prescribing to change. We've written to the Home Office on that, because it's also practical changes that are needed with the systems, not just with the law change. And obviously, we want to try and grow patient numbers again, which is really important, and help normalize that. So We've got more papers coming out. We'll be doing a series of papers on patients' rights. So we did one last year on driving, and then we followed that up with another one on employment, and we've got another one in that series on housing to come out fairly soon. So that when I say housing, it's really how do social housing and landlords treat those living in the homes. Are they following the law? Are they understanding this as a medication? Because we know anecdotally and through some survey work that isn't always necessarily the case. So we view that as being really important as well. Talking sort of making sure that prescription patients are treated like anybody else in society, and their prescription is treated no differently to any other prescription. Excuse me, and that will really help with destigmatization and helping move the industry forward as well. So that's really important.
That's it. No, it's there's a lot of work to do, but it takes a village, doesn't it? As they say, it's like so we will continue to monitor what you guys are doing. And no, thank you very much for coming on the show. And yeah, thanks again, Mike. And we'll chat soon.
Absolutely, sounds great. Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
No worries. Alrighty, we'll catch you soon. Cheers.